all signs point to this de-escalating. The market is saying it, multinational groups are saying it, supranational groups are calling on Israel in particular at this point not to retaliate. After all, the Iran attack was a retaliation in itself. What does Israel decide to do?
Well, Israel has to respond to this attack directly on its soil. How it decides to attack is very much up in the air. Certainly, we have passed the moment of unplanned escalation. Israel is now deliberately planning its retaliatory strike in a way that is supposed to escalate to de-escalate. Essentially, what Israel needs to figure out is how to get back to deterrence with the Iranians, where the Iranians don't feel like a door has been open for them to regularly strike Israel's own territory from their own.
Ryan, why does Israel have to respond? Why does it have to retaliate? It was an attack on its soil, but it in itself was a retaliation, and it's heard from the Iranians that it's one and done.
Well, if they don't respond to the Iranians, then there is that precedent that's set from Tehran's perspective, as well as some other regional rivals, that countries like Iran can attack Israeli soil without any sort of military response. That would embolden them in future escalation scenarios and would complicate things. For example, if Israel ever does invade southern Lebanon to try to clear out Hezbollah from those areas, that could create a scenario in which Iran feels emboldened to strike Israel earlier or more often, or it could end up in a scenario in which anytime Iran wants to signal its displeasure to Israel or to force them to change policies, they could also resume these similar kind of attacks. And Israel simply doesn't want to live in a world in which Iran feels like it can strike Israel more or less on Tehran's calendar or on Tehran's political calculus.
I know, but I mean, anyone can strike anyone at any point, right? It's up to the individual actors if they want to strike. There's no reason for Iran to strike Israel unprovoked if Israel doesn't perhaps retaliate now. And after all, it was pretty much a win in the sense that there were no casualties. One little girl obviously very badly injured, but no casualties.
Well, certainly, but Israel has no intention of abandoning its shadow war against Iran. Israel's preference is to get the war back into the shadows, get back to covert escalation. That's where Israel is the most comfortable. That's where it believes it's starting to have some sort of impact on Iranian policies. You know, for example, by changing the way that Iran deploys some of its frontline officers from that strike on the consulate in Damascus. So that's where Israel wants to get. But they can't get back to that place if they believe that every time they carry out covert action against the Iranians, it results in a barrage of attacks against Israel itself. And then they're not always sure that all of their allies like Jordan and the United States will necessarily be there for every one of these escalations, and that at some point Israel could be left on their own.
It's the first time in a while, though, that Israel has felt cooperation from an international community. Israel must be pretty pleased about that and feel a little bit safer as well because of that. So, in your estimation, what is the correct amount of retaliation?
So the Israelis have a series of options they've got. Of course, they can go into the proxy theaters, third-party countries like Syria, Lebanon, where they're currently already active. They could up the ante there, attack more Iranian assets in those countries. They could even strike some of the Iranian embassies in those countries again, if that's what they decided to retaliate against. But that may not be enough because this attack came directly from Iran itself. And perhaps one of the least escalatory and yet still strategically important or strategically significant attacks could be on the origin points of some of these launch sites within Iran itself, where the attacks themselves may not cause a whole lot of damage, may not cause a lot of outrage within Iran, but would still allow Israel to demonstrate that they would respond directly against origin points of attack from Iranian soil.
Has Israel the military manpower and the stamina, frankly, after 6 months of war to do all of what you just said, as well as continue its operation in Gaza, which apparently involves another attack on Rafah?
Well, certainly no. The Israelis do not have the ability to carry out an extended campaign against Iran, which is why they need to calculate that whatever their counterattack is going to be is also a one-and-done situation. If Iran decides to reply with further attacks on Israel, and we start to see the Iran-Israel relationship sort of move into something analogous to what we see in Yemen between the U.S. and the Houthis, where it's more or less open-ended of firing back and forth intermittently, that's something that Israel can't really afford to do, and that it'll lose international support rather quickly if that's a scenario that we end up in.